Hey everybody, Love's Next Door, Chapter 5, Part 1. Someone was pounding at the front door. Startled from her short and restless sleep, Stacy rolled over and landed on the floor with a thud. The quilt tangled around her legs. Every muscle in her body ached from sleeping on the couch. Groaning, she lifted herself off the floor. The person on the other side of the door was persistent, Stacy thought, as she ambled to the kitchen where she glanced at the wall clock. "Hold your horses," she yelled. The clock read 6 o'clock. Who the heck would be at my door at this time in the morning? She mumbled as Heidi scurried behind her. Stacy, still half asleep, unlocked the front door and yanked it open. "Well, good morning, sunshine," Lizzie said sweetly as she brushed past Stacy and stepped into the front hallway, making herself at home. She pulled off her coat and boots and headed for the kitchen to start a pot of coffee. Lizzie didn't want to say another word until she had at least one fresh coffee to activate her senses. What she was about to tell Stacy was going to knock her socks off. Stacy watched as Lizzie made for the kitchen. A cold draft blew through the partially open front door as she stood in the foyer, staring at her friend. Something was up. Lizzie never dropped in unannounced, particularly so early in the morning. It must be something especially important, she thought, as she pushed the door shut and followed Lizzie. Lizzie," she said slowly, "do you know what time it is?" Yes I do," she said, turning around and smiling at Stacy. It was a smile that said, "I know something you don't know." The kind of smile Lizzie always used just before revealing a juicy bit of gossip. Lizzie looked at Stacy. Her eyes were red and blotchy. "What happened to you, girl? You look like something the dog dragged in." Lizzie glanced over at Heidi and said, "Of course, all respects to the present company." Stacy let the remark go, pretending she didn't hear it. She wasn't in the mood to discuss what had happened last night. She and Justin had promised to keep it between the two of them, and that's the way it would stay. She rolled her eyes towards the ceiling and ignored the question. "Oh, I so would have told Lizzie." "What gives?" Stacy asked curiously, leaning her body against the kitchen doorway. "Well, you're not going to believe." Lizzie stopped herself in mid-sentence. "Hold on. You're still half asleep. Before we get into this, why don't you throw on some clothes, and by then I'll have a steamy cup of java ready. You're going to want to sit and talk about this, so go." This morning of all mornings, a friend to share coffee with sure sounded great. With a look of gratitude, Stacy turned and moved quickly to her bedroom. She pulled on a pair of gray slacks and creamy cable-knit sweater and thick gray socks. Quickly putting on a pair of small gold earrings, she examined her reflection for a moment before washing her face, finishing with a splash of cold water in an attempt to reduce the puffiness around her eyes. She ran a brush through her straight brown hair, which brought back the shine and bounce, and applied a light frosted lip gloss after brushing her teeth. The rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee began to drift into the bathroom, and when she returned to the kitchen, she found Lizzie sitting comfortably at the table sipping a coffee. She pulled a chair out and sat down, looking across the table at her smiling friend. Stacy picked up a mug of coffee Lizzie had poured for her and took a gulp, wincing slightly as the hot liquid burned the back of her throat. "Okay, Lizzie, what's up?" she asked, prompting Lizzie to begin. Lizzie put her cup down on the table and leaned toward Stacy. It almost killed her not to call last night, but she wanted to tell Stacy this bit of news in person. Lizzie liked gossip, and she couldn't sleep last night just thinking about it. This was something Stacy had to know. Stacy felt a slight surge of excitement run through her as she waited patiently for the story to begin. "Come on, Lizzie, I'm dying of curiosity," she pleaded. Lizzie laughed at her. Okay. Last night, after we left the restaurant, I decided to take the long way home so I could pick up some bagels for breakfast. After the coffee we had, I was feeling energized, to say the least. Anyway, I pulled into the little coffee shop off the highway. You know the one I mean, the one with those world-famous bagels," she explained. Stacy looked at her head and shook her head in response and waited for her to continue. "Well, this is where the story gets a little more exciting. You'll never guess who I saw." It was too early in the morning to be playing games, and after a night like last night, Stacy really wasn't in the mood for guessing games. "I don't know," she responded in a tired voice. "Who?" Lizzie could barely contain herself. "Cheryl." Stacy let a sigh, showing her obvious disappointment with the way the story was evolving. "Lizzie, hopefully you didn't rush over there here this morning to tell me that," she said dryly. She looked up and walked to the counter and began refilling the coffee cup. "But there's a good part. She wasn't alone. She was with some guy, and they weren't drinking coffee." Stacy stopped in her tracks. Turning to look at Lizzie, her mouth open and her hazel eyes the size of saucers. Oh no, you're kidding, right? Stacy slid back into her chair, ready to hear more. Lizzie laughed at the expression on her face. She was necking like crazy with this guy in the front seat of his car, and I'm sure he wasn't from around here, Lizzie said, singing out the words. Stacy was shocked and speechless. She sat there staring at Lizzie. Are you positive it was her? Maybe it was someone who looked like her. Stacy could only hope that it was all a mistake. Lizzie raised an eyebrow and pursed her lips. Come on, Stacy, is it really that hard to believe that Cheryl would mess around on Justin? Well, no, but are you sure? A part of Stacy was hoping it was true, but she quickly pushed the thought aside. When I saw them together, I went into the coffee shop and sat by the window with a coffee. I didn't take my eyes off the car they were in. Just before I left, Cheryl pried herself from the mystery man and stepped from the car, jumping into her own jalopy, and drove away, following him out of the parking lot. It was Cheryl, all right, and I'm telling you, she was acting like she knew him really well, if you know what I mean. Oh my God! Stacy stood up and started pacing around the kitchen table. What are you going to do? Me? Lizzie blurted in disbelief. I'm not going to do anything, but I think you should tell Justin. Oh, no, not me. Lizzie didn't know what had happened last night with Justin, and under circumstances, Stacy had no intention of being the bearer of bad news. Besides, he likely wouldn't believe me anyway after my antics at the restaurant. He'd think I was just up to some crazy stunts. She stood up and placed her hands on her hips, trying to think clearly. Her head started pounding. There must be something we can do, she said, walking to the kitchen window and gazing out. She couldn't do it. She couldn't tell him. If Cheryl was cheating on Justin, he'd find out sooner or later. After all, this was a very small town. Stacy walked back to the kitchen table and sat down, deep in thought. She drummed her fingers on the table and stared at the wall. Lizzie sat looking at her friend, hoping she would come up with an idea. Okay, Stacy said at last. Here's what we're going to do. Liz was all ears. Her hazel eyes widened. What? Nothing. We're going to do absolutely nothing. Cheryl is being foolish and reckless, so I think it's best we leave things alone. If you saw her at the coffee shop, others probably did as well. Justin is bound to find out soon enough. Let it come from someone else, not us. Her expression did not relay the conviction of her words. Lizzie, I just don't want to be blamed for causing trouble. And if it turns out there's an explanation, or if Justin chooses to believe whatever excuse Cheryl comes up with, then we'll both be in his bad books. You know, he'll shoot the messengers. Lizzie couldn't believe that Stacy was letting this slide. As she walked over to the sink and dumped the rest of her coffee down the drain, she rinsed her mug and placed it on the counter. Okay, but I'm dying to find out who this guy is. I might play detective with this one. Do you want to help it? Do you want to help? Lizzie asked. It was tempting, but Stacy shook her head, refusing. No, I'm going to stay out of it. And if you need someone to listen to all the gory details, I'm the gal for the job. Lizzie laughed as she walked out the door and pulled on her coat and boots. Why don't we get together for lunch today? That sounds great. Let's meet at the deli around 1. Fine, I'll see you later. Then with a wave of her hand, she walked to her car, got in, and drove away, leaving Stacy standing in the doorway, her mind racing with unanswered questions about Cheryl and the mystery man. Stacy quickly closed the door against the cold wind and busied herself in the living room, tidying up. She thought about what Lizzie had said as she folded the quilt and placed it on the back of the sofa. Anger welled up inside of her. She thought about Justin and how he would react when he discovered that Cheryl was two-timing. The more she thought about it, the more infuriated she became. Why would Cheryl run around such a great guy? Why chance losing him? Why rip out his heart? Her mind was reeling. Better to wait and see what super sleuth Lizzie Beth uncovers. Stacy headed for her manuscript and immersed herself in work. Part 2 shall be tomorrow.